Well, thank you so much again for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm very excited to learn more about Syrian youth empowerment. So my first question for you is, what are the main barriers Syrians face in gaining access to higher education?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Uh, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It's very important, and having the resources and having the tools is very important, like part of the work that we do and what needs to be fixed in order to have more inclusive higher education in general, and especially for refugees and displaced students. In terms of the biggest main barriers, there are a few that I can think of. Number one is immigration policies and how difficult it is to get the visa. So, and this is across the board, of course, in the United States in the past 4 years with the previous administration was particularly difficult because that was like a specific, there was specific set of policies that were targeting immigrants and students, and especially the from the countries that we work with, namely Syria, one of the countries that were included in the travel ban. So definitely immigration is a big one, but even beyond that, getting a visa is very difficult. And many times our students get a full scholarship, get admission, but then the visa become very difficult. So that is difficult from the host country's side, but also there are some challenges that refugees face where they don't necessarily have the proper papers. And that is a different problem because it's not driven by politics, it's just driven by a process that is missing some papers, or that is missing like a passport, or that is missing whatever that is. And that is definitely a barrier. I don't necessarily know what is the solution, but I know that it is a barrier. There are some countries that have been better than others in accepting refugees who do not necessarily have the proper papers in their educational system. It's different also at the stage, at the age, like for younger students, usually a part of schools, it's different than university, different than higher, like beyond university, master's or PhD. So that is number one, immigration. Number two is just lack of opportunities. And there are opportunities. I'm not saying that there aren't opportunities, but there are not enough opportunities that will incentivize a lot of students to apply. And just to verify, your question is about students who are interested in applying abroad, or are we talking about in general, like even in their home
I would
countries?
say mostly like abroad, like within the US.
So that is the second one where there are some opportunities, but there are not a lot of opportunities. The opportunities are usually reserved to the top students, like top students who are willing to go through the process and who are, who has really good English, who has really good credentials, whether with their SAT, whether with their numbers in general. But for students who, let's say, someone who lost 2 or 3 years because of the war, and they missed on a few years of their education, it's almost impossible to get a scholarship. They might get an admission, but not a scholarship. So there's this gap where there is opportunities, but they are usually reserved for a specific kind of students, or students who can kind of go the extra mile. Number three is really the infrastructure and in general. So for example, in Syria, there's only one center that conduct TOEFL and SAT, and that is in Damascus. And all the students who want to take that test has to go to Damascus, which could be risky at times. It's not the easiest thing. The COVID, in one way, it made it much more difficult because there were multiple cancellations for the very few tests that occur in that specific center. But at the same time, the TOEFL was allowed to be taken from home. But at the same time, a lot of our students who attempted to take the TOEFL, because we do support our students take the TOEFL, they had many issues with the electricity, with the Wi-Fi, with the internet connectivity, and it is very rigid in a sense that if you lose your connectivity for 30 seconds, you're just like, you will be kicked out. There's no way that you can get a resolution really like fast. You will have to kind of pay again or do it again, and it happened with one of our students. So there are all these very specific things to the region that our students are applying, and you have to keep in mind when you're designing policies or when you're designing solutions for these students, because in this specific case, TOEFL ETS did a good job in allowing students from Syria to take it online, to take it from home. But at the same time, it was very challenging. The infrastructure, all what I've mentioned has been very challenging. All right, what else? The costs, of course, the cost of these tests are very prohibitive. And that is something that we do as part of SYE, as part of our program. We cover the SAT, the TOEFL, the college fee, the waivers, all of that. We provide that. But if not, it's almost impossible for any Syrian to apply. Just the few $100s that we're talking about, like the $200 for TOEFL, the $100 for SAT, sending for $15 to send your TOEFL and SAT for additional colleges. So we have solved many of these problems because we had the resources to do it and to communicate with universities. For some of them will waive their application fees. For some of them will accept like the PDF version until they're admitted. But if on its own, it's very, very challenging for someone to just like decide to apply. And lastly, maybe I should have started with this, is that the American system is very, very complicated and very convoluted. And it requires so many things that are very, very American centric, which is not a bad thing because it actually gives the admission officer a comprehensive view, but then it's not intuitive. It's not you just go and you know that you'll have to have really good extracurriculars. You really have to have like a really good essay. The approach to the essay, for example, is something that is very American. Like you tell your story. That is not how it works in the UK, let alone in Syria. In the UK, it's much more, the essay should be much more academic about why you want to do this specific field. In America, it's about your dreams and your background and how the events that happen in the past like shape the person you are and the person you want to be. So like these cross-cultural differences makes it particularly challenging for students who do not necessarily have the resources or the cultural background to know or to navigate it on their own, which gives a leg up for the people who can or who can afford to have people to help them, whether it's counselors, whether it's tutors, whatever that is. So those are the main barriers that like just on top of my head I can think of, and they are at the same time the reason why we exist, because we try to facilitate all of these, minus the integration one because it's really beyond our control, but everything else, that's what SYE try to provide to the students and facilitate for the students.
Yeah, I saw that SYE also has a program targeted at students from Iraq. How do the barriers to higher education differ for Syrians and Iraqis? How are the barriers similar?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so SYE's mission is to support students from conflict countries. And we started with Syria. I am from Syria. All the co-founders are from Syria. It was, we're in the midst of the conflict. And after a few years of carrying our programs and having very, very successful outcomes in securing admissions and scholarships from top universities to our students, we just realized that this is a model that can be copied and can be copied without putting pressure on the existing model. So the way that we thought about it, if we can build an Iraqi team from the bottom up and work with them on creating the curriculum, or use our curriculum as a baseline, but like localize it by Iraqis for Iraqis, we can amplify the impact without cannibalizing the results or the opportunities of any of the two groups, because the way universities work, that they recruit based on countries, not necessarily based on region. Sometimes it is region, but most of the time it's countries, and usually it's different. So this was our thinking, and in the future we'll be growing into more countries, and not necessarily only Arab countries, but there are so many Arab countries in conflict, unfortunately, where we have enough now to just expand in countries where we also speak the language, where we have like a bit of an understanding of the culture. So answering your question about how that differs, it doesn't really differ that much. For example, Iraq was not part of the travel ban list, so that is easier. Iraq has an American embassy where there are a lot of resources that are active on the ground, like consulate in Erbil, the embassy in Baghdad, all of that. So there's like more exposure to the American system, where like if someone wants to have these information, they can like theoretically go, but it's still very, very difficult, very convoluted like process that requires a lot of support. It's still the same amount of money that you will need to invest in order to sit on these tests, on these exams. Maybe they have more centers. They do have more centers than Syria does, but pretty much everything else, it's pretty much the same, because the Iraqi educational system is equally different from the American one comparing to the Syrian.
Yeah. How does SYE support access and/or retention in higher education?
Yeah, so So in terms of retention is not a problem because once our students get the opportunity, they get the scholarships, get the admission, they are in it for the long run. They are there. They really appreciate the opportunity. They go all in. Like we've never even thought of like someone dropping because why would you drop from MIT or Harvard or Wellesley or whatever college you get in on full scholarship, let alone that these students are very, very bright, very, very ambitious. But in terms of the access, it is exactly by addressing all these problems that I shared with you. And we take a very, very localized approach. So we know exactly what it means to like, what does it really mean for the TOEFL to cost $200? Like that's a lot of money in Syria, especially with now the economy. Like we know it. We can't just like say, all right, we will do a cost sharing program where the students will pay for SAT, we pay for TOEFL. It's not an option. Like we know the realities on the ground. This is number one. The way that we design the curriculum, like the communications that we use, whether like WhatsApp, Facebook, like all of that, we take a again very localized approach for the things that our students use. Zoom for a while was, if I recall correctly, was banned from Syria, and then there were all other organizations that were using Zoom for their lectures or for their seminars, the international organization, and they wouldn't get any traction. And it was as simple as that. It was banned. Like it would require VPN to get. So that is just like one example where we design our programs really to address every single need of the student. How we reach them is also the same. And I think most importantly is the mentorship relationship that they have with their mentors who we recruit, we cherry pick, we train. They're all like really caring individuals who really, really want to help and want to support, but also have the knowledge, have the training, have a way of doing it and on delivering. And I think it boils down to the trust that we've built with the people, like with the people that we serve. They really, really trust that we care. They really trust that we're doing this because we care about them and we want them to be successful and that we are them. I was in Syria just 8-9 years ago, so they can really relate to who we are as an organization and what we're trying to do. The other thing is that, so I told you what we do there, like what we do to get that side of the equation, right? In terms of what we do here or in the US or in the countries that we serve, we exactly what I've been doing with you just before this conversation started. Like, okay, you're organized, you focus on this. Can you introduce me to universities? We talk to universities all the time. We talk about with partners all the time. We manage to to partner with College Board, with ETS. So everything is reflection of the needs of our students. Like our students need to take the TOEFL and SAT. So we reach out to ETS and College Board and got like waivers for some of our needs for the testing. So, and we just move all these waivers to our students to take advantage of and to kind of incorporate them as part of the process. We knew that there's a gap in the writing, for example, like our students are not used to write, let alone the American style. So we are now putting together workshops for students to know how to write, but also we put in place a process, how to review their essays, how the mentors can review the essays. We have volunteers who review the essays, who are experts or who have done it in the past, who can. So all this, like I gave you tons of examples of like what kind of things that we do to increase access.
Thank you so much. The next question is, how many students have accessed college as a result of the SYE initiative?
I have to go back to be able to answer this question, but we have more than 300 students went in our program. I know that the rate is in the 90s in terms of the students that go to college, but that is not the figure of people who went to abroad. Some of them are in Syria, but we have a lot of students. And this year, we're hearing a lot from this year, which will increase the numbers because we're just like literally these 2 weeks, we've been hearing a lot from universities, the admission from universities for this cohort.
Oh, that's right, because it's about the time when students have to make decisions. Forgot about
exactly.
that.
Yeah. So
for my next question, how is the recruitment process conducted for both mentors and mentees?
Yeah. All right. So I'll start with the mentees because it's pretty straightforward. The mentors is a little bit more complicated. For the mentees, for the students, Well, we have a very good social media presence now. People know about us. We have partnerships with a lot of like the bigger Syrian groups, pages on Facebook, Iraqis, pages on Facebook. So it starts by us posting the application online. We have a pretty difficult application with 6 questions, minimum words, like a lot of information collected, data points about their age, about their backgrounds, all of that. And on top of that, the 6 questions. And then we inquire about their extracurriculars, all of that. Based on that, we filter the applications. A lot of them goes to the interview round where we conduct interviews, all us as an organization leadership, but also many of the mentors who volunteer to interview. And there are many questions. There are a rubric for the way we evaluate answers. There are comments that are taken after every interview. And then from there, we, based on the numbers that we decide earlier that we want to take for the year, we, filter further down and pick the top students. We also, like, for example, for underrepresented students, we give them like more points based on specific like metrics. From smaller city, if someone has been displaced, all of that, like, get them a little bit of extra points in our system in order to reach like the perfect, most equal and equitable class. Every year we aspire to do better. So this is from the students. It's a lot of work for the students, whether it's the application or the interview. Or in terms of the mentors, historically, I mentioned that we cherry pick the mentors. We really do. Like, we really are creating community, not just an organization. Our mentors are friends now. We had a retreat once, and then the second one that was planned was canceled because of Corona. But we really want our mentors to feel that they're part of a family, of an organization. And I pay a lot of attention to this. So we try to do it with people that we know or people that we interacted with in the past who express interest. A lot of our mentors start by reviewing essays for our students. And then after a year or two, when we feel that they're ready, when they feel that they have the time and they're ready, there's the recruiting process starts. Sometimes we find like a cluster of people who are just like a really good fit in the get-go. Like, for example, we worked for a couple of years, and it's still going with a group who works with refugees in Stanford. It has been a great pipeline for great mentors who have been with us. And this, we don't have to know them personally, because we just like know that the way that they were recruited, they were part like self-selective group of that organization, is aligned to our values. They still have to go through the process, and the process is basically submit an application. It's not like a huge application, but there's an application, and then there's an interview from someone from our staff, and then based on that we evaluate our needs, and based on that we extend offers.
Next question is, I know you said that the relationship between mentors and mentees is very strong. What strategies do you use to build the relationship to make it that way?
So a big part of it is organic, because both people are driven to the organization for, like, the incentives are aligned. Like, you have a student who really needs the help and who's really appreciative of the help, and you have a mentor who's volunteering to provide his or her expertise to the students, to be matched with the best students that she can be matched with to achieve a goal, which is, getting the admission scholarship. So there's already a lot is embedded in the structure of the organization and the incentives of both mentors and mentees. So I told you how intentional we are with our mentors. We know our mentors. We get a lot of data from our mentors, but also from our personal knowledge about like what they're interested in, what they care about, all that kind of stuff. And we try to match based on our readings of the applications and the interviews with the students who will be a good match. So sometimes it could be based on the field of studies. Sometimes it could be based on the lived experience. If someone is from Damascus, maybe they would rather someone from Damascus. If someone is maybe a young woman would prefer to be with a woman mentor to kind of be inspired. But, we take these into considerations. It's not a perfect, like, it's never a perfect match just because you don't know what you don't know and you don't know the chemistry between people. But in general, we do pay attention to the matching process, to be thoughtful and to be intentional. And then the program is designed in a way that there are a lot of interaction, and there are a lot of informal interaction too. So there's like a weekly or bi-weekly calls, but also most of the communication happen on WhatsApp just because it's the main medium for students. And then it becomes like very informal in a sense that when they have a question, they don't have to wait for 2 weeks. They can text you on WhatsApp. And, that builds that rapport in general. And as I mentioned, our mentors are not like, there's not a huge age gap, so they can connect. I mentioned that I was like 8 years ago the students who are applying now, because really I was that person. So I understand who they are. I've been in their shoes. I've been stressed about the same, all that kind of stuff. So there's this really natural way of connecting and matching.
Going on to this, what is the impact of your mentorship service on students? And this can be academic performance, career, or character.
It really depends. Every relationship is different. So we're talking aside from the results, aside from, getting a scholarship, all of that. I think it's all the above. It happens quite often. You would see a lot of impact of a mentor on a mentee, and vice versa, by the way. Like, also mentees inspire us like tremendously. But just because the structure of the relationship, mentors, mentee, the age difference, this few years, I see it all over. Professionally, of course, they take a lot of the patterns of like the professionalism of the mentors, like how they how they do things in general, like from a communication standpoint. But more importantly, like really the mentors would advise the students. Like, if you want to be an architect and your mentor is an architect, of course you'll be talking about this. Of course they will be pushing you to think in thoughtful ways about your career. So you see a lot of our mentees who, their top choice of a company, for example, to work for is like the same company of the mentor, because they've heard about it or they've like inspired by it. In terms of character, I see it a lot from their drive kind of to serve and to help. So a lot of our students want to volunteer back and become mentors. Like, as soon as they get to schools, we usually don't accept them immediately. Like, you would need a few years just to get ready, but they are sort of inspired by the same thinking and mentality, and like they want to help the same way that they would help. So it was characters, professional. What is the
Academic performance, career, and
academic
character.
Performance? Academic performance is the least, because these are like top students. They are like, they don't need any inspiration there. I always say that our students are way smarter than we are. Like, they would get to universities that I would never dream to go. So I think academic wise, like, they don't need a lot of, at least with me, for example, they don't need a lot of inspiration from me. So I think you see it, but again, it is very person to person. Every relationship is different, every person is different. But there is a lot of impact and influence.
What recommendations do you have for members of the U.S. university community, from presidents to student advocates, to promote refugee access and integration into higher education?
Right off the bat, like, to be very realistic, just talk to us. Like, talk to organizations that are working with students, like on the ground, because not only we can be a conduit to the opportunities and the messaging, but also we can work very closely with universities to address the needs that they want, like the needs and what they need to see. So I totally understand the academic, the universities are not going to compromise their academics for any reason, right? That is a good thing. But at the same time, come and tell us, what are you looking for? And it happens a lot. And I have so much respect for universities that, they will get an application from our students, and they just like, they will be very curious to know more. So they will reach out, like, let's talk. And they start ask questions, and then they start like telling us, like, all right, this is the kind of students that we're looking for. Like, if you can direct your students to like that type of students to apply, there's a bigger chance of them being accepted. No expectations, no promises. This is how you cultivate the community. This is how you get the interest. Like, this is how you really put the university on the map. Because if you want to provide scholarships, you just don't know where to start, talk to us. We will tell you exactly what are you up against. Not necessarily us specifically, our organization, but it could be other organizations that work with students. Like, for example, we had a university once that really couldn't take any of our students because I don't remember what it was. I think they couldn't get a transcript. And then once we reached out and we explained why they can't get transcript, because they lost, the school was bombed, they have no access, they left it. So like, we were able kind of to work around the transcript with something else. It was like a pretty simple fix. They just like, never knew, and we never knew that this was the problem. So this was like a total lack of communication, that maybe one phone call, like 30 minutes, 20 minutes, could have solved it, could have get everyone what they wanted and create these opportunities for students. So that is my take. Like, talk to the locals, talk to the people on the ground who can tell you exactly what needs to be done and what is missing and what they need from you too.
I think that's a really important recommendation. Okay,
Thank you.
so earlier you mentioned that a lot of alumni come back and work as mentors. Other than that, how do you keep in touch with alumni of your program and maintain relationships?
To be very honest with you, we can do better. We have staff now, but we're a predominantly volunteer-run organization. I'm volunteer. I don't make any money out of SYE. I've always had my full-time job, and now I'm a full-time master's student. So one day we will get to that in terms of like kind of building. It is still very informal now. I am in touch with many of our alumni, but in my personal capacity, we're not there yet, but we will eventually.
Okay, my last question for you is, are you considering adding programs targeted at other nationalities?
Yes. So last year, we added multiple programs. We added one for Iraq, as I mentioned. It was a pilot. We added a program to help students who graduated from undergrad and who want to apply for graduate programs. And we added a program for 2 years. So for students who need more support, more time, than our 1 year signature program, and they can be enrolled in the 2 year program. Going forward, as I mentioned at one point, our vision is to be the preeminent organization that work with students from conflict countries and conflict zones. And I think we have the model sorted out in terms of like how we can build it without cannibalizing any other work stream, any other country. And it's just a matter of like having the resources, having the time, having the priorities sorted out. But like, we cracked the model. It's just a matter of time and matter of resources. And the resources is an important one, because as we grow, while our model is very transferable and it doesn't require a lot of investment every time you expand to another country, but you will need some people to support that expansion. You would need some fellows, you would need some interns kind of to do the legwork, the operational, the execution, and some of the thinking too. So yeah, there is TBD. That is our goal. Hopefully one day we will not exist because there will be no conflict countries, but more realistically, hopefully one day we will be available for students from all conflict countries. But again, the end goal is for us not to exist. But until then, we're marching forward.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, thank you, Lizzie. I really appreciate you taking the time, putting your time, energy, intellect in a project as important as this. And on behalf of all students who will benefit from your work and your team's work, I thank you and I wish you the best of luck in this pursuit.